Good evening. My apologies this week. I'm saying the shir Wednesday night, almost 12 o'clock in the evening, because I was out of town at a family chasna. And with the planes and with the airports and everything, it was a tremendous wear and tear. We were happy that we went, and it was a beautiful simcha, but we just got home, and we like always to do it earlier in the week, so it gives everyone a chance, or anyone a chance who would like to hear the shir. But anyway, here we go for Parshas Shelach. Now, the pasuk says, Shelach lecha. The word lecha is troubling to the Meforshim. Like, send for yourself. And Rashi says, L'daitcha. It's up to you. Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, it's up to you. I am not telling you to send them. There may be trouble. It's your decision. And he was being pushed by the people. So at the end he sent, and we know the calamity that it brought. They were supposed to go from Mitzrayim into Israel in 11 days, and they ended up a detour of 40 years staying in the actual Midbar. That for each day that they went to spy out and find out the strategic ability of the people who lived in Eretz Yisrael to defend and to respond to their coming in to conquer, that they were there for the 40 days, and for the 40 days they were punished with 40 years. A year for each day they were there. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz really asks the question that why should they have been punished for 40 years? They didn't speak for 40 days Lashon Hara. They were in Eretz Yisrael. They came back. It was a 20-minute Aveira, a half an hour. And he says because the whole attitude when they left, it was Kulam Anoshim, Roshei V'nei Yisrael Hema. They were tzaddikim. And when they got to Eretz Yisrael, something soured. And Moshe Rabbeinu smelled this in the beginning before it even happening. And that's why he added on a Yud to Yehoshua's name. Now, Yehoshua had the name of Hosea, but he added a Yud, so in the beginning it was Yud K. That means, as Rashi says, Ka. May God, may the Rabbanu Shalom Yoshiacha save you, meyatzas meraglim, from what's going to end up happening. And says Reb Chaim that things don't begin with the end results. They begin at the beginning of the story. And it was already brewing in them to come back and stress the bad, because there was bad, there was good. They saw many funerals taking place, and there was a lot going on. So it wasn't like everything they saw was good. It wasn't Motzi Shemra that they did. It was Lashon Hara, because it was made up. And they saw so much good, and that was what Yehoshua and Kalev chose to underscore when they went into Eretz Yisrael and came back, that Yehoshua and Kalev stressed the good. But the other 10 stressed all of the bad, and that took the brewing, so they were punished for all 40 days. even though what they reported took them 20 minutes. But it was because of the 40 days of how they set their perspective about Eretz Yisrael that it brought to a point that they even said, Hechazak hu harafa hamat im rov, that they questioned, they said, even if our Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to help us, he won't be able to. They're so mighty that the Rabbanu Shalom will not be able to conquer. They were talking kfira and minas and terrible, terrible apikursis. They went from the madrega of being such tzaddikim, kulam anoshim roshe v'nei Yisrael hema, and coming back. And they misused their tongues so vehemently, like the Medrash says, that how did they die at the end? That their tongues elongated, became long, all the way down to their stomachs, and from there they were punished. It was an ugly scene. And which just sends the message to us that we have to internalize the messages that always come to us throughout life. That means when a person is passing a scene and sees something, a terrible lo accident, it's a message to him. Why did he find himself in that place and at that time, to those 20 seconds, to witness what he saw? HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted him to see it. You know, I never talk about things that happen in the world. We try to stick to specific divrei Torah and things we can learn from the Parsha. But I remember years and years ago, there were 3 boys who in Bnei Brak were approached by a Talmud Chacham and asked if they could take to Japan a package. And it was for a Yid in Japan who needed it for his parnasa, and he said, and if you take it, then I'm giving you a free ticket. You can go back and meantime take a vacation in Europe. I'm paying for everything. And the boys were thrilled. Where would we ever find money to go on such a trip? And they said, of course, we'll take it. We'll drop it off. We'll get on the next plane and go wherever we want to go. And the package had drugs. And when they got to Japan, they were caught. And it took the whole Klal Yisrael all over the world to get them out. The oldest one, who was 18, they wanted to kill. He was sentenced to death. And the other 2, they wanted in jail for 30 and 40 years. And the whole Klal Yisrael worked very hard and saved them, but it was after the torture and no kosher food till they got it, and they had to sit in one spot 12 hours a day, and if they moved, they were beaten up on the spot. And at that time, when this happened and the whole Klal Yisrael knew about it, there were 2 boys, yeshiva boys, who were in Switzerland going to Eretz Yisrael, and a man came up to one of the 2 boys, they were not together, and said, you know, I have a get. A woman has been waiting for this writ of divorce, the get, for years. She's an aguna. We finally got the get, and would you be willing to take it to Eretz Yisrael, be the shliach? We will designate you as the shliach to bring her the get. So the yeshiva bacher thought, and we're going to give you $2,000, $5,000, for the shlichus. And the Bocher thought, such a mitzvah to be mater an aguna, and to allow her to remarry. And she's sitting with her family like in a state of being chained because she couldn't remarry. And he took the envelope with the get, and the same thing happened with another boy who was not connected to this young man. And on the plane, they were seated near each other. And one said to the other, Baruch Hashem, I'm a shliach mitzvah, I'm bringing a get to a woman who was desperate for a get, and it took them years to get it, and I am the shliach to bring it. And the other boy turned white, and he said, you know something? I was given also an envelope with a get. So they realized that there was something wrong, and they went into the bathroom, and they opened up the envelope. There was no get in there. It was white powder. It was some sort of drug. And they emptied it out in the bathroom and flushed it. When they got off the plane, they were arrested, and don't ask what happened. It wasn't so simple. Now, at that time, the story with these three boys in Japan happened. Why didn't they learn up? That you don't take from strangers, and this guy was talking to them and learning and discussing a Torah topic that made him seem like a saint, a Talmud Chacham, a Ben Torah. But you have to learn up what to do and when to do and how. You have to keep your eyes open to sometimes current events. And they knew about this story, of the boys in Japan. And that's what every Rav said to them. Why didn't you learn up from what was happening in Japan, not to take in an airport or somewhere, something from someone who you don't know and you don't know what the result is going to be? And that's really what the Meforshim say here about Miriam. Miriam, because of what she said about her brother, and that's what the Meforshim ask, why was that story with Miriam put at the end of Baloscha, and right afterwards the story of the Meraglim? And the Medrash asks it, and the Rashi brings it, that they saw what bad talking does. V'lo lokhu musar. That's the lashon of Rashi. They didn't internalize what they had witnessed and saw as a tragedy. The whole Klal Yisrael had to remain a week. The whole hundreds of thousands of it for Miriam because she spoke lashon hara. And now you go in there and say you come back and talk lashon hara. So they never internalized. And we have to learn from that story that we see events every day of the week and we hear things. And messages, they are messages to us in our lives. But you have to stop for the moment. What can I learn up from this and from that? How will that set my thinking straight of how things will end up at the end of a story if we don't learn up from what this and this happened and occurred right before our eyes? Because that can be the effective tool that brings to light the message to you, to us. Now, The question is, if you look at the first psukim, you know, the psukim say, Hachazak hu harafa hamat im hu imrov, that, you know, strategically are they powerful, and come back and report. That was really their mission. Yet you find that Moshe Rabbeinu, in his last pasuk of what he instructed them, he talked about the fruit. Is the fruit good? What kind of, and they brought back some of the fruit, gigantic figs and dates, that they showed that this was unbelievable, what was there in Eretz Israel, the goodness. But why did Moshe Rabbeinu say that? I mean, they were not really interested in how the apples looked and how they were there on a strategic mission of how they're up against and what they're about to encounter. So why talk about the fruit? So the Meforshim say, which I guess I could put it into a simple expression to understand it. And what the Meforshim basically say is like this. If a man, they don't say this, I'm giving the example, but this is what it amounts to. If someone owns apartment buildings, and he goes once a month to see each building, how clean it is outside, how the lobby looks, but he doesn't just walk in superficially, stand outside and take a general look. He'll go to the roof, is there any leaking? He'll look at the windows, are there any with a draft that need fixing? Because it's his possession, and he wants to know and see every aspect of its stability and how are they managing it, and he wants those answers also. And the window and the roof just reinforce. Now, if he was a visitor and it wasn't his building, he wouldn't care about the roof or the windows. But since it's his, he wants to be able to get an accurate update of the stability and the fortitude of the building and how it's doing structurally and cleanliness and everything else. The reason that Moshe Rabbeinu told them about the fruit was because he wanted to internalize the visit, that they're not just going for only the strategic and the fighting and the subsequent war, but he wanted them to internalize the ownership of Eretz Israel, that it's the Yiddens, that this isn't something that you're just visiting a country and you're coming back, how strong the people are or are not. But when you go there, you have a feeling of ownership, and you internalize that type of feeling, you are able to appreciate the personal attachment that you have to the thing. And that's why he wanted the fruit. The fruit wasn't the issue, but he wanted the Meraglim to have a feeling this is their future home, and this is the ownership title to this land for you as Yidden coming in to Eretz Yisrael. So the criticism was not learning up. And we go through life, we hear 10 things in a day, not one thing touches us because we do not internalize. But we saw it, and we passed by, and we heard someone telling us something that Min HaShamayim, they're sending you a message. And we have to internalize and sensitize ourselves. Now, as we mentioned before, Moshe Rabbeinu, and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky asked this question, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. He asked that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to fortify Yehoshua, so he added on the Yud. What happened to Kalev? Kalev came back and also said good. And Moshe Rabbeinu saw that this was the chevra that was going to be fortified and come back with good. Why nothing done for him? Kalev was an individual, and he and Yehoshua were promised they're going to come into Eretz Yisrael, and they did. And the other 600,000 people, nerds, it didn't affect the women, and it didn't affect the children or the elderly over 60. But there were 600,000 men who were between 20 and 60 that were told that because you were busy crying after the spies, the people came back and started to say how bad it was, and you started to cry, and boy, what happened over here? And we were not, we came into a midbar, we're going to be destroyed, and Hashem wants to take us into Eretz Yisrael. We'll last a week, we'll last a month, and we'll be all killed out. Oh, that's what you have to say? You're not going into Eretz Yisrael. And every year, they used to dig graves, all 600,000, and they slept on Tisha B'Av, because that was the night, that was the day that this whole story happened. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, oh, you were crying for nothing? Oh, I'm going to give you something to cry for. And both Batei Mikdash, both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And they paid a very high price. We're still in Golus because of that story. So they came in and they left, and Yehoshua was fortified with Hashem's name, Yud Kei, and Kalev, nothing, ran off to Maris HaMachpelah to daven that he should be saved also. So he took the initiative on his own. But when they slept in the graves every year, 15,000 did not wake up. And if they woke up in the morning, they knew it wasn't their year to die, because 15,000 times 40 years is 600,000. And if they saw that in the morning they woke up, they knew it wasn't their year, and 15,000 indeed did not wake up, and they were the 15,000 of that year that had to die and would never go into Eretz Yisrael. And this happened every single year. The question is what happened at the end, because the last year, the last 15,000 went into the grave. They dug the grave and they got into the grave and slept there. And the last 15,000, who were the finishing of the 600,000, didn't die. They woke up in the morning, so the next night they slept again because they thought they made a mistake and that they didn't establish Rosh Chodesh properly, and it wasn't the 9th, it wasn't Tisha B'Av. So they thought maybe they were off by a day, and they went and they slept the next night, Yud, in the grave. But they woke up again. And this went on to the 15th day of Av. And that's why the Gemara says in Tainus, when it gives around 10 reasons why we have such a Yom Tiv of the 15th day, Chamisha Asar B'Av, and that we celebrate it, one of the reasons is that the Meisei Midbar, everyone died, but the last 15 didn't, because they saw it wasn't meant for them. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said no one was going to go in from the 600,000 to Eretz Yisrael. And rather than going into the different opinions how it happened, I'll just leave with you that the last 15 did not die, And they ended up going into Eretz Israel for schusim for different reasons. But the bottom line is that the people from 20 to 60 died and didn't go in as a result of their crying after this happened. And the reason, the question we ask is, why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu worry about Kalev also and do something for him? So the Rosh Yeshiva said, because Yehoshua at that time was not married. He ended up marrying Rochav, that woman of ill repute, who was on the other side, and that Kalev and Pinchas stayed in the house by her and promised her, if she saves them, that when they come in and conquer Eretz Israel, she will be saved. And she ended up marrying Yehoshua. And they had 2 daughters, and from those 2 daughters, they had no sons. From those 2 daughters, 8 Kohanim Gedolim came out. That this Rochav did tshuva, and she married Yehoshua. But Moshe Rabbeinu was not worried about Kalev because he was married to Miriam. And said the Rosh Yeshiva that when somebody falls into a dreaded area, that they're about to do terrible averis or make terrible decisions, that when you're married to a Miriam, a tzaddikas, she's going to save you. So Moshe Rabbeinu that was his sister, and he knew what kind of woman she was. So he wasn't worried about Kalev, and that's why he didn't add any letters to his name, and he didn't do anything special to save Kalev, because he felt that when he gets back and his wife is standing right there, he's not going to report the bad, but he's going to accentuate the good. Now, we know that the Yud was added to Yehoshua's name, to Hosea. Where did that Yud come from? In the Medrash, there's discussion. Because when you take a Yud, it came from Sarah's name. Her name was Sarai, and the Yud was taken away, and they put a Hey in, Sarah. But the Yud, the Medrash says, was in suspension for years and years, and very angry that in Shemayim they took the Yud that was on Sarai's name and put it into suspension and gave her a Hey. But it was that Yud that was in suspension that was added to Hosea's name. Now, and there's a big discussion. Why was that the Yud that was taken to put onto Hosea? Because Sarah Imenu, her whole life, she took a back tier. In other words, a second place to Avram Avinu. What he set up as being Magayer, the Goyim and everything, the Achnas Sarchim, she followed him. So that would like give you an impression that she was weak. But the truth is that Sarah, when it made a difference, that she came and saw her son Yitzchak was with Yishmael, and he was starting to have a influence, she said, this is not going to happen. And she said to Avram, get rid of her and her son. Now that was unusual for how Sarah interacted with Avram Avinu. She was always soft and did what he wanted, and Avram was troubled. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah shema b'kola. Anything that you're hearing now from Sarah, do it. You listen to her. So the reason that Moshe Rabbeinu took that Yud, because it came from Sarah. And Sarah indeed was soft and was a true Eishes Chayil and was something special to Avram Avinu as a role model of a wife. But when something meant crossing the line, she took a very firm and strong backbone and insisted. And that's what Yehoshua needed, that when they were talking him into coming back with them with the bad report, he needed fortitude and to utilize the power of that now was part and parcel of him to withstand the temptation or the pressure of joining the other group. And that's why it was specifically the Yud of Sarah Imenu. And indeed, when Shlomo HaMelech made Eishes Chayil, so the Medrash says that when he says Semer Upishtim, he mentions Dorsha, Semer Upishtim, those words in Eishes Chayil, that it's talking about Sarah. What does Sarah have to do with Semer, with wool, Upishtim, and flax? But those are the two things that become shatnas. Shatnas is a mitzvah in the Torah, and it's a lav. If someone puts on a coat or something that has wool and linen in it mixed together, that's an Isser D'Oraisa. And I mentioned to you that the Arizal says that if someone wears it, for 40 days he's locked out of heaven with his tefillas. He can daven with the biggest kavanah, Shemana Esrei and everything else, and he's locked out of heaven. So that's why Shlomo HaMelech mentions in the Tzemer Upishtim, and he was referring to Sarah, because when she had to know that two things don't mix, because individually, Tzemer is no problem, and neither is Pishtim. But when you put them together, she understood that Yitzchak with Yishmael, putting together the good and the bad, it creates a terrible negative force, which she didn't want to have her son any part of. And that's the reason that she demanded of Avram Avinu to send away Hagar and Yishmael. Now, when they came back and reported to Klal Yisrael, one of the statements they made was, Vanehi be'einenu kacha govim, and we appeared to them like little grasshoppers, little nothing. These were giants. I saw little bugs running around that we looked like that. V'chein hayinu be'eineim, and so we were in their eyes. In other words, we felt like insignificant grasshoppers, and that's how they were looking at us. So the Meforshim ask, how did they know how they appeared in their eyes? And the answer of Yaakov once said on this question, he said, because when a person presents himself and feels inferior, then the person looking at them, they go for an appointment to get a job, an interview. And they come in feeling, I'm not worthy really of getting such an important job. And they're speaking, but it's half-hearted, because they don't feel about themselves that they're entitled, or that they have a shaykhus to this job. And then if that's their attitude and their inner feeling, that is exactly how the person interviewing them is going to feel. But if they come in with backbone and conviction that they can do the job and they can fit into the role of what they have to do, so then it emboldens and it embraces their frame of mind to project themselves as worthy of the position. And that's what happened there. They came in so intimidated by what they were seeing and what they felt that regardless of Hashem's promises the whole time, that they were going to be so outstanding and love life in Eretz Yisrael. And at the end it was disaster, because it all started off with a lack of emunah. Hashem's promising you, I'm sending you to Eretz Zavas Cholav Udvash. You're going to have heavenly bliss as a result of your living in Eretz Yisrael. And why didn't they take heed? Hashem said that's the end of the story. But they didn't say that. As I said before, they even questioned, Hashem is not strong enough to be able to encounter the battle and succeed. He said that about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we have to convince ourselves, and it's not gaiva, it's not ego, that we are given talents and abilities. And when we get a job as a Rav, you don't have to come in with ego and with gaiva, but you have to feel that you effectively can apply yourself to the responsibilities of what this job is and be able to succeed and full flourish with it. And that conviction of confidence will propel him not only to succeed partially, but totally, and be more effective than even he thought he would end up being. Now, the Medrash says that when Yirmiyahu wrote Eicha, which we say at the night of Tisha B'Av, we say Eicha. Now, if you look, the Medrash says at the prokem of Eicha, every parak, every pasuk begins with the Aleph Beis. The first pasuk begins with the letter Aleph. The second pasuk begins with the letter Beis, and then Gimel, then Daled. And of the three main, the four prokem, that is the system that he codified and that he wrote Eicha. But if you take a look in the fourth parak, every pasuk is again Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav. But when you come to the pasuk that begins with an ayin, the pasuk that begins with a pei comes first. In other words, ayin is before a pei in the Aleph Beis. And for three of the prokem, it's in order. But in the fourth parak, there's one change, that they put the ayin after the pei. And the Medrash says, why is that? Why did Yirmiyahu do that? And the answer the Medrash says is because Masha Ra'u B'einayim, Amru Masha Ra'u B'einayim, Masha Amru B'fiyem. That which they said with their mouths was lo ra'u be'einayim. That's not what they really saw. So therefore, to tell us that the ayin, which is einayim, eyes, and the pei, which is pihem, their mouth, that it was a lot different than what they actually saw. So Yirmiyahu put into, when he lamented and said Eicha, he made a remez in one pasuk that the whole problem of Churban Beis HaMikdash, which came after they finally got into Eretz Yisrael, was because Amru b'fiyam mashalo ro'u be'einayam, that they didn't see actually what they were reporting. And we have negiyas. We could see a scene. You can have two Eidim, two witnesses that come to Bezdin. One saw this and one saw that. What do you mean? You're talking about the same event. But we are twisted by perceptions and by negiyas, by what we are swayed to want to believe. So we can see something black and white. And because it may have a negiyas to a friend, to a child, to a situation, it becomes almost twisted. That's exactly what the Medrash says. Why Yirmiyahu stressed the backbone of honesty, that people should be able to say what they saw and not to underscore something they didn't see, because they're allowing themselves into the realm of impartiality with partiality, with the fact that they have some negiyas and they would like to have something come out. We have to train ourselves to divest us when we have a negiyas, to be able to have clear vision and be able to see and want to have the end result to be something which is worthy of saying and doing that you actually saw. And be impartial. Now, the real question is, what happened with these Meraglim? They went there, the pasuk says, they went there as tzaddikim. What happened that turned them into Rishoyim, that cost from 11 days going into Eretz Yisrael 40 years for Klal Yisrael? And the answer that Mekubalim and some Balei Musar referred to is they saw that Klal Yisrael was living in the Midbar, in the desert, with complete heavenly intervention every single day. The clothes that they wore for 40 years were the same clothes that they went in, that they had at the end of the 40 years. And as the Medrash, the Gemara says, that they grew with the begodim. That means when they were 23, and it was 40 years later about going into Eretz Yisrael, the women, the elderly men, it grew with them. And every day it was washed, it was starched, it was ironed, that they had every day perfectly fresh clothes, that never did it seem soiled or dirty, but it grew. They had the mun, that whatever, last parsha, they were complaining they didn't have meat, and we remember the onions and the pickles. I mean, when they ate the mun, they were able to think of anything they wanted. So if they were missing pickles, think about pickles while you're eating the mun. So what were they complaining about? But the answer is that perception and background influence how a person feels. They weren't missing anything. They had heavenly life that was so extreme that they were almost like superhuman, that they were put into a position with the clothes and with the shoes, v'nalcha lo vatseka, that they didn't have torn shoes, and the shoes grew with them. If they were 10 years old and now they were 22, the shoes grew and they had perfectly fine shoes to walk with. But perception seeps in, and we allow outside forces to influence, to mold, and to shape our attitudes and our vision. And if we stop for a moment and we discard the foreign influence and the negative influence, then we can stay on track towards our goal. Now, they came into Eretz Israel and they saw people are planting, are harvesting. So they said, what? We didn't have to do any of this in the Midbar, in the desert. So we're going to give up a complete heavenly life and become megushim, physical, and we're going to have to start sowing and plowing and watering and doing things to be able to survive, that we don't need to go down. And that's why they use the lashon yorod yoradnu. The meraglim, in what they described, is that they were going down in madrega, that they have heavenly existence and now they're going to become regular human beings and watering and sowing and harvesting. What do we have to go down for? Let's push and make an impression why we should stay in the Midbar. But say the Meforshim, it wasn't the truth. And Yehoshua and Kalev stepped forward and said, oh, no, not you said yorod yoradnu, that we're going to go down. And we say, because that is the difference in the world between Gashmias and Ruchnias. In other words, why would Hashem put us in this world to have to forever work and toil and by the sweat of our brow live and eat and do everything that we do? Why should that have to happen? Leave us Ruchni. But that was the purpose of the whole world, that we should come down as complete with neshamas and to take the gashmias of the world and elevate every aspect. So when we take a piece of bread and we wash and we make a bracha and we make hamotzi and we eat, so we are doing the ratzon of Hashem, that through the mitzvahs we're elevating all of the gashmias in the world, all of the physical, into a realm of ruchnias. So it wasn't yorod yoradnu, that we're going to go into Eretz Yisrael and go down, but like Kalev and Yehoshua said, olo nala, we're going to take the gashmias of Eretz Yisrael and we're going to refine it and we're going to redeem it. And we're going to take it from being in a state of physicality, and we're going to be able to perfectly uplift the item, that it's going to become higher than it ever was before. And that's the reason, as I've told you at least in 5 occasions, that the Asora Haruge Malchus could not be killed if they were selling, kidnapping and selling their chayav misa. It's a death penalty. But there was no soraf and no malach and no oifan that could effectuate a punishment into the shivtei kah. Why? the angels are higher than people, but the answer is that when you do the Ratzon of Hashem, and you learn, and you daven, and you give $1 to tzedakah, you're taking that gashmias and you're elevating it higher than the angels. So the angels couldn't touch the Shivtei Kor. They had to be born 1,600 years later and killed as Asura Haruge Malchus. Now, we find that after this story, and there's a parsha in our Sedra, in Shelach, that after this, the people suddenly it hit them, we did something terrible. And it's called the story of the Nephilim, and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu and they said, we were rebellious, we were terrible, why did we cry, why did we complain? We want to show our allegiance to our Kodesh Baruch, and we're going into Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe Rabbeinu answered them and said, it's not the time, don't try to do it. You will never succeed against what Hashem's plan is. But they wanted it so badly that they did. They left the Machne Yisrael, and they went towards Eretz Yisrael, and every one of them was killed out. So afterwards, the people who were from their families, they did such tshuva, but they were not answered, and they got killed outside because they wanted to show that they're doing tshuva. Why weren't they answered? Tshuva by us is almost an entitlement. That means when a person does an Aveira and he knows it was bad, he just couldn't hold himself back, and he did this, he did that, that if he comes to a point that he truly felt bad and knew he was doing wrong and he was slapping HaKadosh Baruch Hu with his actions, that Hashem, that's what he wants to hear. Hashivenu avinu l'sorasecha v'korvenu malkeinu lavodasecha. That they can transform the Aveira even into a mitzvah if they do the tshuva me'ava. So why weren't they allowed to have effectively the tshuva accepted, and they wouldn't have been killed? So the answer I want to say is, I once told you a story. I don't know if all of you remember it, but it's worthy of saying again. That the day that Rav Mendele Rimenov was nifter, Lamed Daled Ba'omer, he went up and he started emptying out all of the Gehennims. And when he finished emptying the Gehennims, the last one he went to was Echte V'Oshuv. That the Gemara says that if somebody says, look, I'm doing the Aveira because I can't hold myself back, I want it too bad, the pie looks so delicious, but I know it's not kosher, and he eats from it, but then he has a thought, and I'll end up doing tshuva. Comes Yom Kippur, I'll cry, I'll hit extra the al-chet. So the Gemara says, Ein maspikim biyado la'asos tshuva. He is never given an opportunity, not before and not after, to do tshuva. So when Reb Mendele got done emptying out every Gehennim and sending them to Gan Eden, when he came to the group of Echte V'Yoshev, that I will do the Aveira, and I'll do subsequently tshuva, the Malach who guarded that segment of people said to him, not here, you're not taking anyone out. The Gemara says, Ein maspikim, that we don't give him the opportunity to do tshuva. And Reb Mendele answered him and said, oh, I always learned Ein maspikim doesn't mean we don't give the opportunity. It also means there's no question. A suffix, Ein maspikim, there's no question. Sheyesh biyado la'asos tshuva, that it comes a time that they can do the tshuva and get back into Gan Eden. So the Malach said to him that, oh, it's a beautiful drasha, but here in Shemayim we don't make these drashas. And at that time, the Choiz of Lublin, the good friend of Reb Mendel of Rimenov, was down here in Olam Hazeh at his tish with his Hasidim, and he, not the people, but he heard the discussion in heaven, and he gave a clap on the table, and he said, Rabbosai, to his Olam, that which the Gemara said, that that someone who does the Aveira and then says he wants to do tshuva, ein maspikim biyado lasol tshuva. And it doesn't mean he's not given the opportunity, but it means that we do not, there's no question, sheyesh biyado lasos tshuva. So when the Malach and Rav Mendele heard this, the Malach said, okay, it was upgepaskent in this world, Olam HaTachton, it's all yours. You can take them to Gan Eden. So we have to realize that even when we do the Aveira, don't plan on coming back with tshuva to wipe it out. Try your best not to do it, and if you do it, okay, you do your tshuva, and Rav Mendele always set the path for Yidden, and he set the path that these people who say Echte V'Yoshuv should be able to go into Gan Eden. We should not have to come on to the Eitzah of there's no suffix, but you sheyesh biyado, and with our weaknesses and our human frailties, be able to overcome, not succumb, but overcome our willingness to do with great love and great pleasure, and make that nachas ruach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu vividly, aggressively, and with great love and fear for HaKadosh Baruch Hu.